So good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. It's great to see so many familiar faces and some new faces too. Um, so I want to welcome you all to a People's Hearing on Trade and Inequality. My name is Julie Buona. I use she, her pronouns. If your name is not Julie Buona and you are seeing that on your Zoom screen, once again, I would recommend you change that. I am the director of the Washington Fair Trade Coalition, which is a coalition of over 70 Washington labor unions, environmental organizations, and social justice groups advocating for a just and sustainable global trading system. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us here this evening. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are gathered, albeit virtually, on the traditional land of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish tribe. And so we deeply honor their stewardship of the land, past, present, and future, and recognize that the fight for economic justice is deeply interconnected with the fight for Indigenous sovereignty and environmental protection. So I would encourage you to take this acknowledgement a step further by visiting realrentduwamish.org and contributing rent to the original stewards of this land. So we're going to talk a bit about why we're here before we get into it. So last fall, the U.S. International Trade Commission, or USITC, which is an independent investigative body, invited community members and us into a process meant to examine the real lived impacts of trade policy on working people and other impacted communities. This stemmed from the Biden administration's trade representative requesting an investigation into the distributional impacts of trade, basically how trade agreements have disproportionately affected certain workers and certain communities. And so we engaged in good faith. We had several community members attend some virtual roundtables. We shared our experiences, and we really built momentum to amplify voices that are too often ignored in trade debates. We were also preparing for an in-person component in a handful of cities, including Seattle. And we were assured that regardless of the change in administration, that the investigation would continue. And then at the last minute, everything was canceled. So with less than 24 hours notice until the next virtual roundtable, every single virtual roundtable, every in-person event was canceled. And this was because the reasoning given was the Trump administration withdrew the request for the investigation. So the message was very clear that they were not interested in hearing from us. But of course, they don't get to make that call, right? We know that this kind of political maneuvering isn't new, and it's also not separate from the broader attacks we're seeing on workers, on diversity and equity programs, on migrant communities, on transgender people, and on democracy itself. So, from union busting to gutting environmental protections, from rolling back DEI efforts to making it harder for communities of color, immigrants, and women to build economic security, trade policy is one of the many ways that power is consolidated at the top. Under Trump's first term, we saw these attacks intensify, and now we're really seeing this unprecedented exponential, ramping up and return to the same failed policies that prioritize corporate profits over human lives. But we are here to say that we will not be silenced. We know how this works. The trade justice movement and every social justice movement has not won victories through the benevolence of politicians. They have been won through grassroots organizing and community solidarity. So that's why we're holding this people's hearing. We are naming the real harms of unjust trade policy, and we are making clear demands for a system that works for all of us, not just the wealthy few. So thank you again for being here and for raising your voices. Let's go ahead and get started. few housekeeping things before we get into the questions. I'll just mention one more time. I know I sound like a broken record, but if you are just entering and your name is Julie Buona in the Zoom, that is probably not your name. And so please go ahead and rename yourself. So the way that this will work is it will be a free-flowing conversation moderated by some questions that we have prepared. And those questions are going to be put in the chat if you didn't get them ahead of time. The way that you'll participate is by raising your hand, basically. You'll use the raise hand feature in Zoom. You do that by clicking on the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and selecting raise hand. And if you're on a phone, you tap more and then raise hand. Once it's your turn, I'll call on you to unmute, hence why it's important that your name isn't Julie, and you'll share. And that's how everyone's gonna get a chance to say what they'd like to say. Again, this is a free-flowing conversation, so if your comment doesn't perfectly fit with the question, if it answers, two questions before or whatever, that's totally fine. Just kind of using these questions as a way to stir the conversation. The other thing I'll note is that this is not a panel of trade experts. This is a place and a space for community members to share how they are impacted by trade policy. So please do share. You know best how you and your community members are impacted by these policies. And that's exactly why we're here today. And then the other important thing is that this is a public forum. We will be posting this conversation on our YouTube channel, and it will also, the transcript for this call will be cleaned up and sent to the Trump administration, since I doubt they're here with us today, to make our voices heard. So please do note that what you say in the space can and will be public, and it might be attached to your organization or your name. There is a way in the chat right now to submit your testimony, non-publicly. However, I don't want to discourage anyone from sharing testimony in this space. And if you're concerned for your safety or that of your community regarding our report to the administration, you can reach out to me at julie@washingtonfairtrade.org. Everyone here will be getting an email. And so I can remove or anonymize your testimony before the report is finalized. Just let me know. So those are all the housekeeping things I planned. The other thing I'll just say is if you feel comfortable, please, with your first comment, maybe give a short intro, name, pronoun, org affiliation if you have one, or just what you do, whatever perspective you're coming at it from. If you feel comfortable with that, that would be really helpful just to know who's in the room. So with all that aside, want to thank everyone again who is here. The first question we're going to go into is, how have inequitable economic or trade policies negatively impacted the communities you represent? So again, we're kind of starting out a bit more general, right? If you can't name a specific trade policy, that's totally fine. Just kind of wanting to stir the conversation in terms of how economic policies have impacted your community. So again, you use the raise hand feature. If the raise hand feature isn't working for you for some reasons, if you wave your hand, I'll be able to tell you want to speak, but that would be the best way to start participating. So that's the question I'm putting out there, and I'll give the floor. Okay, perfect. Maya, we'll go with you.
Hey everyone, my name is Maya Morales and founder of Washington People's Privacy, and do my best to help drive people's legislative advocacy. And generally that's at the state level, but sometimes it's local and sometimes it's federal. Usually we sadly are raising issues with various bills, but we also do love to fight for a good bill here and there. I think, two of the ways that pop out for me that are super obvious and I'm sure will be in common with everyone, are the economic impacts in terms of costs on people and also products and goods available. So I think what I've seen is that people have become increasingly dependent on global products. So that means that you've got to have digital tools, internet, and you've got to be banked, right, in order to kind of purchase anything that you need to live more and more so. So I think the way that I see that playing out locally is in like a really wider and wider stratification, right? So there's a bigger gap between wealthy and poor folks, where people in the middle-ish in the past, I think, are really either moving up or down, and everybody's really fighting to stay above water economically. That's one thing that I see. There's another really big impact, which is labor, and I think that's probably also something most of you, I even see some folks I'm familiar with from union organizing and stuff here. So, I think that we've seen a lot of challenges when workers are trying to organize labor at a corporation that is global and that has policies that really just don't trickle down into like local thriving for workers and don't really treat workers like humans. And the more and more that we see, from the tech justice angle, technology impacting that too. I think it's pretty hard on workers. And the last thing I will just say quickly is that we are a semi-rural county where I am in the state. And I think this has had a huge impact on farms and farm workers as well, because immigration policies are very much also part of global trade agreements. And, we've seen these visa programs that are very exploitative and just sort of like yank workers over for a minute, exploit their labor, treat them fairly poorly, and give them pretty bad living conditions, sometimes even like taking their, documents and holding them, that kind of thing. And then just sending them back. And it's just basically extractive, right? And there's no actual pathway to citizenship or really care for the humans that are making this decision to come here. So those are a couple of ways. I think on the farmer and business end, we've seen a lot of trade agreements with like fruits and things like that have ended up making hardships for local farmers. So like there's berry production, for instance, that if we're shipping that stuff here, then it undercuts our local produce market, things like that. That's what I've seen.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much, Maya. Thank you for all those really intersectional insights. And yeah, always interested in hearing the tech angle as well. Phyla, I hope that's how you pronounce your name. I'll hand the floor over to you.
Yes, you got it right. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yeah,
can.
okay. Um, my name is Phyla Bach. I'm a volunteer with the Citizens Trade Campaign. I had been the director of the Pennsylvania Fair Trade Coalition in 2007 and 8. I live in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, which is close to Reading, Pennsylvania, and I've done a lot of organizing and volunteering in Reading. And my report is on the city of Reading. It currently has a population of 95,000. It was a major industrial city, but between 1974 and 2009, it lost 15,000 manufacturing jobs, with a total of over 11,000 certified trade adjustment assistance recipients to date. And in 1990, before NAFTA, and when you talk about the agreements or whatever, this is primarily NAFTA, and then getting into PNTR for China, and the other multilateral trade agreements. In 1990, Reading had a 26.8 poverty rate. Its manufacturing zenith had passed, but that soared to 41.3 in 2011 when the New York Times declared it the poorest city in the country. And by 2018, the poverty rate had declined to 35.4 and is now 29.4%. So these trade agreements have not helped Reading. Um, and today, only little over 31,000 people are employed in manufacturing. And this is 18% 18.5% of total employment. So most of the employment is in the service sector, a lot of which is public, government and schools, as well as health and human services. So I'll stop there. I've tried to cover a lot of topics. I've done a lot of issue and electoral volunteer work in Reading, knocked on doors. So I I have on the ground experience with Reading. So I'll stop there for now.
Great. Thanks so much, Violet. Yeah, that's always really impactful, I think, to hear the stories of these places that have been completely hollowed out and devastated by these trade agreements. So I appreciate that. John, I think you were the next person to raise your hand, and then Clara, you'll go after.
Yes, I'm happy to. I'm John Clausen from Oakland, California, and I had a broom factory for 30 years, manufacturing corn brooms. Everybody's heard of Benjamin Franklin. He's the father of the American broom industry. Long story there, but anyway, very much traditional. And we'd always had a 32% tariff on imported corn brooms before NAFTA, and got very involved in that. And I was elected chairman of the industry. Yeah, there were 125 broom factories in the country at the time when NAFTA started. And they elected me to be the chairman of the industry, and worked with a really interesting experience. Worked with, there are a couple of big Jewish folks in the industry, and said, hey, we're going to get this lobbyist who just retired after 30 years as chief counsel of B'nai B'rith of Anti-Defamation League. And just, New York Times said he's the most influential lobbyist in Washington, D.C. So yeah, happy. So I got to work with David Brody, and really a good guy, got a sense for it. And what happened with us, we got under the, and this is really bipartisan. Both political parties, they're not working for us. And we have to, come together as people. And met with Sean Fain, UAW president in Detroit, had a meeting with him on December 5th in Detroit. And it was very interesting. First thing he says is, he said, yeah, folks, there's 800 billionaires in the United States today. And guess what? All the politicians are paying attention to what they're saying, and they're the ones calling the shots here, folks. So we got to really come together and work as individuals the best we can. So anyway, with the broom industry, it still bothers me. After 25 years, I had 75 employees, good. And I told the U.S. Trade Representative who came to Oakland, Her Excellency Carla Hills at the time, in 1992 was on President Bush's cabinet as U.S. Trade Representative, and came to Stockton, where my factory was, Stockton, California, and talked to us. And she was very much said, no, our future is in, she said, in the U.S. and is in engineering and architecture and accounting and the high tech fields. Factory work like broom making, no, that needs to be done in third world countries like Mexico, where they don't have the capacity we have here in the U.S. And it was just so offensive to me. Anyway, we fought tooth and nail for it. We worked with the U.S. Trade Representative, who gave us some guidelines, what they're looking for. They said they didn't want to put people out of business, but we want to bring in 50% more labor for Mexico, because the Mexican workers at the time there's so many were illegals and they're having a hard time making a living. We got it, and free trade will really be their answer to lift up Mexico. And even people who are here legally with the green cards, you'll go back to Mexico because it's going to be so good. So anyway, we worked with them on what they did. We actually worked with the Mexican manufacturers, following guidelines from the U.S. Trade Representative, worked with them and said, hey, look. And they didn't want us moving down to Mexico because we all a lot more experienced than they were, a lot better factories, more and better operators. And so we worked out a deal, had over 90% approval from both Mexican manufacturers and U.S. manufacturers. Agreed. Took it to the U.S. Trade Representative, the chief negotiator at the time, and he said, "Man, this is great. I wish all industries could do it like this. This is exactly it. It met all the parameters, and we put it in there, and yes, this will be in NAFTA." Well, 2 years later, it was all done in secret. NAFTA was a fast track trade deal, and under that fast track trade rules, it's all done in secret. And then so anyway, and then it had to be voted. Then they brought it up for a vote. I think it was about 1994, somewhere in there, after a couple of years. And they brought it up. It had to be up or down vote in 90 days with no amendments. That's under fast track trade rules. That's what it had to be. So we went back to the U.S. Trade Representative. The chief negotiator said, "Hey, what happened to the room deal? You told us it was going to be done and met all the parameters and here really nicely written out and stuff." He said, "Well, John, I'm sorry, but Bill Clinton got elected in the meantime, and he had different priorities." And I said, "What priorities are those?" Kind of shrugged his shoulders, and that was the end of it. So we fought it tooth and nail and worked with other industries and did the best we could. But and they tried to do everything they could. Where industry, had factories all across the country, and in the House of Representatives, they arranged, well, we'll get the Department of Commerce has some great economists, and we'll let you talk with them, and they're going to say it's going to be good for you. I said, so anyway, we went into the U.S. Commerce Department headquarters there in Washington, D.C., right down the big nice building. Had two of their chief economists came up, laid out these beautiful graphs and said, "Okay, yeah, this is 1995," and had perfect graph. And within the 15 years, the full implementation of NAFTA, Mexican labor rate is only at 15% of U.S. labor rates. And it's going to go up about 3% a year up here at the top, but then the Mexicans are going to go up so fast in 2010 by the full implementation of NAFTA in the 15 years. Mexican labor rates are going to be at 80% of U.S. labor rates. And I told them, and others said, "Hey, well, we'll take off the duties then as that comes up, because we can't compete with slave labor when 1/3 of the cost of a broom is labor." And been in business forever, so anyway, the real thing after it was, as bad as it was for our industry, it totally killed the whole industry, and there are no broom factories left of any size in the U.S. Everything is imported, and it's very, very painful to see when you have broom makers, very skilled craftsmen. Takes 2 years to become a master broom maker. Had, many blind people. The best broom maker ever knew, worked at Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco, was blind, deaf, and mute. And he was so fast, it was all feel, a lot of hand machinery, different unique tools, and just, people, they had zero turnover. People were actually proud craftsmen. They could make a decent living. And so it all went down, and it was very short. So anyway, we wound up after a year, lost 60% market share of the industry. And then the sideshow was we got a consultant and went to the U.S. International Trade Commission that has, that controls all the tariffs and stuff, and filed a 202 complaint like the U.S. steel industry does. We did it on a grassroots level, and you can look it up in the annals of trade history. It's a pretty well-known case, but I testified at the case, and others did too, in both foreign case. But we won our case. U.S. International Trade Commission said you can put And their ruling was put a 32% tariff back on brooms because 1/3 of the cost of a broom was labor. And so that was the value of it. So we couldn't compete with dollar an hour labor in Mexico, and such a high level was there. So so they came in, ruled in our favor, and went to U.S. Trade Representative and said, "Okay, what do we do now?" I said, "Well, you got to get Congress to pass it." So that's both the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, and just on a grassroots level, we got them to pass. Took our ruling from the U.S. International Trade Commission, and they ruled in our favor, took it over, and they actually put it on a trailer bill with something else and passed it. So put it in there, and okay, well, we'll get 3 years at least to kind of see what we can do. After a year, the ISDS court, government Mexico, filed a case against against the U.S. government. And the ISDS courts, which are it's a secret court of 3 foreign judges. They made a ruling with no right of appeal under NAFTA rules, and they ruled against us, fined the U.S. government $23 million in damages, and the tariffs went immediately, came off, and that's when I had to sell the factory. I couldn't. And I begged they'd keep everybody working. They don't do it. I could have sold it to a couple Fortune 500 companies. And I said, "John, we'll take it. You've got some good customers there. You're selling to Walmart and all these other Costco's and all these other people. We take the business. Well, you keep the factory in Stockton with my workers. That's 75 good employees. I knew them for 20, 25 years. I couldn't just tell them, you want to keep your job, move to Mexico." So,
I appreciate that. I appreciate that,
so
John.
anyway, that's, without going too much, but that's it. And that was very, very painful process. And
Yeah.
I've still been fighting ever since. And then I fought with also and successfully fought and stopped Trans-Pacific Partnership a few
That's
years
great.
later. So
That's
with
great.
working with the Electrical Workers Union. Anyway, that's quite a story. But anyway, I
Appreciate
can
that.
write something up for you if you want me to or whatever, and you can get it
Yeah.
out. So
Yeah, of course, that will be really helpful. And yeah, we'll have a lot more time to get into the
yeah,
specifics of
okay.
that.
So
I appreciate that. And I also, definitely want to, lift up, the devastation that has happened. And as a result, the jobs that have been offshored and then also turned into really low wage jobs in other places like Mexico where workers are being
yeah.
taken advantage of. So really,
Yeah, see, and as bad as it was for the US and all the industry is gone, it's even worse for Mexico.
yeah, wasn't
It's so
anymore.
painful
Yeah,
to see. These are
absolutely.
people enslaved.
Appreciate
And
that.
it's
Yeah.
just so sad.
Yeah. All right, I'll
And
pass
both
it
political
on.
parties are in cahoots.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll pass it on to Clara. Go for it, and then Taylor.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Clara Duffy. I am the board president of the Women's Institute for Solidarity and Empowerment. I was wanting to kind of share specifically in the groups that we are working with here in Washington. There's a lot of asylum seekers that are actually coming here because of the discriminatory economic policies and tariffs that are coming from the U.S. on the different countries that they're coming from. So, for instance, like sanctions on Venezuela, there's a lot of Venezuelan migrants and asylum seekers here in Washington, and also Africa, specifically Angola and the Congo. We are working with migrant women who are experiencing really dire conditions here in the US after also escaping dire conditions in their home countries. So not only just the trade policies impacting the industries and the people working for the industries, but also having a widespread impact on communities in the places with these industries, but also in like after people are being forced to migrate to different places because they have lost their economic sovereignty. Yeah, just in terms of like the conditions that these women are facing now, it's really a matter of not having a dignified livelihood and experiencing lack of food security and a lot of having to jump around from place to place in order to be able to have stable housing. So they're really living out of hotels, or some are even still living in encampments at different churches that are able to house them. And in the last few years, this crisis has really escalated, and the state is really not prepared for the level of migrants that are coming here, and it's really having a dire effect on the communities that are coming to our state and really hoping to create a decent livelihood for their families. And I think just in terms of now also with the Trump policies, some of the later questions, I think we will have some more specifics on that. But yeah, I think we have all seen in the news how terrifying it's getting, especially for migrant communities here in the US. But yeah, we'll share more about that on a later question, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think it's so important to talk about those root causes of immigration, especially now. Taylor, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Taylor. I'm the executive director of Queer Power Alliance, and our organization works on advocacy work for LGBTQ, building collective power for LGBTQIA plus liberation. And with the combination of the trade policies and the attacks on the LGBTQ and more specifically trans people of color, there's a couple of twofolds there. We do know that our community, specifically here in Washington State, that since we are a more progressive and blue state, for the trans community, they're seeking refuge to here or other blue states. And that means job insecurities too, as we know that the city of Seattle, the county, King County, and the state is having a deficit. And then add that to the federal government pulling back their funding along with the tariffs on top of it, and the prices going up and the employment going down, that housing is becoming a scarcity, and finding secured housing is going to be a scarcity. And so those are like, with the tariffs and the prices of everything, it's not just one thing, it's like everything, the food, which was already a barrier for a lot of LGBTQ folks, housing, where we know that the queer community is paying 30% or more towards their housing than the general population. And then you add the additional barriers with that, medication increase and being able to access healthcare will also become an issue, because our healthcare is tied to our jobs. And if they're tied to our jobs and there's lack of jobs or the removal of jobs due to the tariffs and the trade, I've also heard that even mom and pop shops and restaurants and bars are having to increase their prices and lower their staff. So all of those are compacting our community in these various ways. And we know that when the most marginalized person, which is a Black trans woman, is being is struggling then the rest of the community is struggling too. And except for the very hierarchy. So that's where our, that's how it's negatively impacting our communities in the LGBTQ community. And that's just like very low amount of conversation around it, where there's so many other variables, which I'm sure we'll get into later. So thank you for letting me share.
Thanks so much, Taylor. Yeah, that's some really important context, and appreciate you bringing in the housing issues, the healthcare issues. Those are really important things that, we might not often make that direct connection to trade, but it all definitely impacts those separate things. So I'll open it again for this question. I know there's some new people on the call. So anyone who hasn't spoken yet, who wants to talk about economic or trade policies negatively impacting communities you're representing. But otherwise, we'll go on to, Betsy, yes, go for it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Betsy Zucker. I'm in Portland, Oregon. I use she, her. I'm a healthcare and labor activist. I work mostly, but not entirely, with Portland Jobs with Justice and our healthcare committee. And I really appreciated the comments looking at the root causes of immigration. It's something that just is not in our national conversation and is so critically important, from both trade effects on the countries impacted, where migrants are coming from, as well as trade impacts on communities here. I know that there's a community here in Oregon, which was a really very successful pulp and paper mill on the suburbs of Portland. And due to crazy corporate multinational finagling, it was bought and passed to a couple of other corporations and closed for reasons that had nothing to do with the plant itself, but had to do with the positioning of that corporation in its other dealings. And the bottom line was that 200 people lost really good union jobs at that mill for reasons that really had nothing to do with the community, but had to do with our foreign trade policies that prioritize everything but people's values and people's jobs. And although those jobs were lost and they got some benefits, they will never replace that kind of good union job in a small community in suburban/rural Oregon. And so it's on both sides of the divide that these trade policies are affecting workers. And it's great to hear from people about both of those, and also about the businesses that have gone out of business because of really trade policies that aren't for us, but really prioritize corporations. I have other things I would like to bring in later, having to do with the effect of trade on the cost of medications and impacts on really the most marginalized people in our healthcare system, as well as the oldest and disabled. But I'll leave that for later. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Betsy. Nicholas, you are on mute. let me here. Let's see if I can ask to unmute. That might be easier.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Worries.
Here I am. So I would just like to speak some perspective to this question. Nick Matson, ILWU. So to point out these inequities in the way trade and where workers fit in. I mean, so for perspective, in 1860, American corporations went to a select group of European nations that were going through famines or hardships, and et cetera, and they went to sign up workers or buy workers from their respective monarchies, what have you. My family was selected out of Finland in 1879. We arrived in Astoria, Oregon in 1880. We went directly to work for the fishing canneries and for the company docks in Astoria, Oregon. So there is no end to where a corporation will go to select workers. If the proper regulations are not in place, they'll go anywhere. They'll displace anyone from any native land anywhere to do it cheaper. But we stayed. Generations go by. The first 4 years of the Trump administration arrives, and my family's been working at the Astoria waterfront for 5 generations at this point. What became of his first round of tariffs ended log exports in the port of Astoria for the first time in all those generations. His policies, and as negatively as those beginnings were, the policies of these tariffs, they are so cutthroat and so fast on the coast where marine trade is the way of life. I mean, all the guys I went to high school with worked for Astoria Forest Products, which was the exporter in Astoria. Those guys are gone. We know right now that with the present tariffs that soy has a ban from 3 export companies in the Northwest. We know that there's a ban on logs. It's a ban on logs, but they said there's beetles. There's no beetles. We have a steel export ban on us. I mean, I haven't worked in 2 months as an 8-year registered longshoreman. I mean, every time this person is in office and makes moves, I can tell you that we people on the coast who have built everything east of us in the Northwest through maritime from the first European civilizations in this area. I mean, the trickle effect has been absolutely outrageous. The Port of Grays Harbor is looking to quadruple their soy output. There's a ban on soy. So they're hesitant because, well, what happens if the ban comes to soy meal, which the whole brand new terminal is for? Port of Olympia, a warehouser is down to maintaining 1 ship worth of export timber, and the Port of Longview is down to maintaining 1 ship of export. This has decreases for so many workforces. There's less longshore jobs. There's less port administrative jobs, like actually public port jobs. There's less jobs in the woods felling the timber. There's less trucking jobs. There's less jobs at the dock from warehousing. Everything is down to absolute minimum manning, and that's on 1 product. I mean, I just really would like to highlight how violent these effects of corporate greed and this insider idea that we can make these tariffs and starve people and punish people and hurt the American public, just how real it is. I mean, as I said before, is negatively as my family was brought to this country because labor was needed and they found it where people were starving to death. We still managed to build something and become Americans and build an entire coastal culture, in the Northwest. And a man can dismantle it in 4 years with insane policy. My God. I mean, I just really wanted to speak that comparative into the conversation and give some context, because there are entire populations who live inside marine trade, and there's a lot of us. So anyway, I just wanted to say that.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Nick, for that context. I think that's really powerful. We're going to move on to the second question here, just noting time. Yeah, just want to make sure everyone gets a chance to speak. So I want to hear from everyone, but maybe keep your testimony a bit shorter. We'll have the chance to go through a bunch of questions. So the second question is, kind of zooming out. We know that trade and economic policy is not a siloed issue. I think obviously a lot of the speakers here have already addressed that. But this question is, how do trade and economic policies intersect with other social issues affecting your community? Some examples are racial justice, gender equity, climate change, immigration, et cetera, et cetera. Again, please raise your hand if you would like to answer this question. I know these are big questions, so it's fine if we have a moment of silence. Maya, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to focus more on like the digital aspects of trade for this answer, because I think we have a good representation of other issues here. So, I think one of the things we're probably all noticing is the outsized role of big tech in a lot of the changes that are happening right now. And that has been around, right? We've been negotiating like how to try to put guardrails on commercial surveillance, data surveillance in people's lives, and the way that what that means. We unpack that for anybody who's maybe not familiar, but basically it means that companies can just suck in people's data without there being really any guardrails around it. There's a few states that have put narrow protections. We enacted our own fairly narrow, but still really helpful health data privacy law in Washington State to protect people's health data. But it's still a fairly narrow application, and it doesn't really get at the whole sort of universe of data. And so one of the ways that I think we're definitely seeing a huge impact. Sorry about my cat; he's feeling really needy. Is the way that data is intersecting with immigration policy. So we have already seen that, like, we had a raid on a roofing company up here, and I think it was either 37 or 40 workers were literally just abducted and taken and detained. This was a company that had 100 workers, and literally, as the last speaker was pointing out, really hugely contributes to our community. I mean, like, they literally fix everybody's roofs, and they're like working really hard, like all year, but particularly all summer. And many of those raids are being facilitated with the use of data that our government is getting access to through commercial apps, right? And through data brokers. And so what was reported from that raid was that they came in with pictures and names, and they knew who they were trying to track down. And so, where do you get that information from if someone actually doesn't necessarily have paperwork files? So that's one of the ways, is that, the use of data being weaponized against actual immigrants and workers. We have a very strong law in Washington State to protect immigrant workers, and you're not allowed to target immigrant workers here. And yet we weren't able to protect these folks from being sort of tracked down and hunted down. And so that's one way. I also want to just sort of articulate around the jobs level, generally, that, I'm bumping into more and more people who are literally personally telling me that they're using AI, or their job is starting to use AI, and occasionally meeting people who've already lost their, content writing or things like that, jobs to AI. Teachers who are really worried about it in their schools and for their jobs, but also how it impacts them socially and their kids. So there's just a lot going on around tech policy, and it's sometimes hard to connect the dots between digital trade agreements and like how we are locally using our devices. But essentially, when we don't have any guardrails on the way that big tech can make agreements with us around our privacy or the way that they want to use our data, we really lose a lot of power. And in many cases, that's worker power, but it also can just be our ability to utilize our rights. And so, we're seeing like face scans more and more being used in travel contexts in ways that people aren't really don't have to consent to, but don't know about that. There's just a lot there. So I think that's one of the ways that I think digital trade is really a key area where we've been needing to enact guardrails and ensure that we are protecting workers' jobs, but also people's privacy, and kind of recognizing that data privacy underpins so many other sets of rights that we take for granted, even labor. So we've seen in Washington State, for folks who aren't from Washington on this call, some really interesting legislation floated in Washington that would have allowed workers to actually have collective bargaining rights on AI and things like that. So there's interesting things happening here, and I think we need to see more of that. I think, if this is for our incoming administration, I think what I want to communicate is that actually privacy is helpful to communities thriving, and ensuring that people have rights and that folks in the United States have rights to where our data lives and how it's controlled and that we can delete it and things like that. That's actually really important for our society. And it's not something to take lightly. So I'll leave it there.
Awesome. Thank you, Maya. So we'll go to Donna, and then we'll do Jessica, and then we'll go to John P. I see you in the chat. So we'll go to you, and you can talk about Social Security. So let's start with Donna, Jessica, and then John P.
Thanks, Julie. Is my audio coming in okay?
Yeah.
Sometimes my earbuds tend to skew the voice. Okay, thanks. Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. My name's Donna Danina, and I'm here representing the International Women's Alliance. I am based in Seattle, Washington, however, so hello to some of my fellow city mates that are on the call today. So in terms of the work that I do in IWA, International Women's Alliance, the scope of looking at the impacts, we do have a intentional focus to look at how women are impacted in particular. And since we're talking about trade, just wanted to point out that, the whatever we want to call it, free trade, fair trade, whatever it is, it's never really fair. And really only benefits, and we all know this, I think really only benefits those that have the most to gain out of it, which are the multi-billionaires, multinational corporations, and the workers suffer the most. But the heaviest burden really falls on the women. One thing, and I'm glad that Maya brought up the issue of digital tech, because something that we've been monitoring also is the trend of trying to bring in more women, especially from the global South, into the tech industry, because so many women in the global South find themselves in informal economy just because there aren't enough jobs to go around. There are a lot of women who are essentially unskilled, uneducated, especially women from the rural communities in the global South. And so there was this sort of plan, mainly under Biden, and we'll see if Trump will kind of pull out of this, but with the IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Cooperation, trade framework that Biden was really trying to push, there was this whole program to try to get 7 million women and girls, to engage in these upskilling initiatives, essentially giving them education, training them to take on various tech type of jobs, which eventually, they'll go into these and maybe establish their own tech company, which will then get, swallowed up by larger conglomerates. And that's sort of the pattern of where the tech industry is going. If we're talking about the USMCA, right, and looking at the unfair treatment of workers in Mexico, another sort of statistic to look at are the high rates of femicide among women along the border cities there. Many of the maquiladoras, or women factory workers, while on one hand, the USMCA claims to provide provisions, better provisions for these workers in the factories, what the governments fail to do is provide protections for these women who outside of the workplace or outside of the factories are actually very vulnerable to kidnapping, trafficking, and even murder. And one of the, startling sort of case studies is the city of Juarez, or Ciudad Juarez, which is one of the concentrations of these factories where many of the products that are produced, 70% of it goes to the US market, right? And many of those workers are women. And Ciudad Juarez at one point was considered the most murderous city in the entire world. And so we have to look at the intersections with how these trade policies negatively impact countries that actually don't benefit, right? Where it benefits, of course, and I think the idea is it would benefit the North American market. But now we're seeing that, with Trump's tariffs, that it's increasing the cost of goods. If you follow the trends year over year, the inflation is the highest it's ever been, not even just in the US, but across the world. And now the tariffs are making the cost of goods, and will continue to make the cost of goods much, much higher, and the burden will go on the consumer. So we know what's going to happen then to the working class in this country, and especially the women. I was just reading earlier today that we know that $1.5 trillion are going to be cut from social services that many working class people rely on in this country. And $1 trillion was just approved to go to the defense budget, right? And so instead of looking at how to, help working class people in this country, this government under Trump is looking to beef up the defense budget. So we know what this is all pointing to. And I think these are just some of the concerns that we have in IWA in terms of the grave impacts this is going to have, not just on the working class, but working class women and their children. I think one of the things that we're looking at now is under the different social service programs that are going to be cut, SNAP, there's going to be 15.5 million children affected by the loss of these types of services that allow children to eat every day. And so we really have to be very critical with how Trump and his administration, is pushing these different trade policies, and, where he's funneling most of the budget. And it's, moving away from those that really need it the most. And those are the working class, the migrants in this country, and women and children. And so there's a lot more to say with that, but I will reserve that for the subsequent questions. But thank you so much.
I'm sure there's a lot more to say. Thank you so much, Donna. We'll go to Jessica and then John P. to talk about Social Security. So Jessica, go for it.
Thank you. My name is Jessica Valdez, I use she and her pronouns, and I am the board treasurer of WISE, Women's Institute for Solidarity and Empowerment. Just to share a little bit more about what we do, we are a 501c3 research and resource institute based in Seattle, but really focused on partnering with community-based and grassroots organizations of women, especially working with women, Indigenous women, migrant women, you name it, to better understand their day-to-day living conditions and experiences, the concerns that they have, and to, through research and through deepening our understanding of these issues, find ways to solve these problems together in community. And so one of our main priority research areas at this time is looking at the issues of Indigenous women. And so while this may not be like a recent example, but an example I did want to bring into the room is around the pipelines here locally in the US and the impacts that has on our Indigenous communities here. I think at a previous like roundtable that Claire and I did, we were pointing out like it's not like a black and white good or bad thing. Well, we see like the pipeline have the possibility of having like positive impacts in creating jobs, local jobs and employment for our communities here. We also know that there historically has also been trends of violence against women, especially Indigenous women, in relation to the pipelines being built on their land. And so we know that there's increases of coincidences of like violence, illicit drugs, sex trafficking in these situations. And so to note, like just to bring into the room yet another example of an industry, a trade industry that this country has historically really relied on, has been really interrelated with the international scale as well, but also has really dire impacts, especially on our Indigenous communities here locally. And so, yeah, more to say, I'm sure about the particular impacts on our Indigenous communities and our women, but wanted to just name that as well. Thank you.
Appreciate that so much, Jessica. John P. I know the name says Julie, but you're not Julie. There we go. Okay. Hi.
I'm sorry. I didn't find a way to change it. I'm on my
No
phone.
worries. Go for it. And then we'll go into the next question. But go for it, John.
All right. Thank you. So my name is John Fanenstein. I am the local president for the American Federation of Government Employees, Local 3937. And we represent Social Security Administration employees in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska. I just thank you very much for inviting me. I don't have a whole lot of background in trade agreements. I am a federal employee at Social Security and a union representative. I've been there for 17 years as an employee. 9 of those I have been a union official in some capacity. I just wanted to sort of give some background. You may have read a lot of news articles about what is happening at the Social Security Administration under DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, as it is called, led by Elon Musk. I can tell you that in our region, which no longer exists, by the way, our regional office was dissolved and incorporated into 3 other pre-existing regions: the Chicago region, the Kansas City region, and the Denver region. So we've gone from 10 regions down to 4. We've undergone a massive restructuring and reorganization under this administration in an effort to downsize our workforce. Our acting commissioner has stated publicly that he wants to reduce our workforce by 7,000 employees. And we have only 57,000 employees remaining. We are at a 50-year staffing low, assisting more clientele than we ever had in the 90-year history of Social Security. Entire departments, entire components, including our Office of Civil Rights and Equal Opportunity, which handles EEO complaints for employees facing discrimination, that was dissolved. And all of those employees there were placed on 30 days administrative leave pending their termination. They have been terminated. Our Office of Transformation, which was designed to assist individuals, claimants with disabilities facing barriers. Same thing happened to them. All of those employees were terminated without the offer of reassignment. For the other components that are not front-facing, like I do in a field office, or folks in the 800 number, the teleservice centers, their components have been dissolved, but some of them were offered voluntary reassignment to mission-critical positions like mine. And unfortunately, a lot of them may have never worked in operations. They may have never taken a Social Security claim or done a Social Security card application. They're going to have to be trained. Some of them may not wish to do so, and they will simply resign. it's a huge downsizing of our workforce that has already been in trouble for many, many years. Prior to the pandemic, we were already struggling with staffing. And under DOGE, they've also been putting forth various theories and speculations about waste, fraud, and abuse. I can tell you, in my 17-year career, I had only one fraud case, and that involved a mother who was receiving benefits for her children and herself for taking care of those children. She abandoned them with their grandparents and continued collecting those checks. And I was the employee who assisted our Office of Inspector General to track her down and get restitution. That is how fraud really occurs at the SSA. It's generally individuals who at one time were rightly eligible for those payments, and circumstances changed and they failed to report them, and they were no longer eligible for those payments. This administration and the people under DOGE have no understanding of how our agency operates, nor are they interested in understanding it. They believe that people who are scheduling appointments for initial claims, for retirement survivors claims, they might not be who they say they are. So we can't do those claims over the phone. They have to come in with their ID in order to prove their identity. And the people who are elderly or have no ability to access the internet and trying to change their direct deposit, they're not who they claim to be. They're somebody else. So they have to come into the field office. And that is all designed to crush our front-facing offices, our public offices, in order to prove that Social Security is a failure and that the only way to save it is to break it, and that we need to begin the move towards privatization because we have a $2.7 trillion surplus that is sitting there in our trust fund. And the millionaires and billionaires aren't profiting off of it. So they can't directly attack the program. They cannot eliminate Social Security, but they can destroy it from within. And that is exactly what is occurring right now. I am cautiously optimistic. Our acting commissioner has moved off of some of the ID proofing procedures that he originally and quite frankly illegitimately put forth to combat this imaginary fraud, which accounts for 1% of all of the benefits that we pay out. Those are improper payments. Of that 1%, only 3% is attributed to proven fraud. We are and that's way better than the private sector. Any private sector benefits, you will find fraud way higher than that. So he's moving off of that because of the efforts of AFGE, and we are going to keep up the fight to save Social Security because it's in danger right now. These people are out to destroy it. And if they get their way and they turn public opinion against us because they degrade our service to the point where the public just gives up and says, sure, privatize it, then we are all in a huge amount of trouble economically. And the people who are going to suffer the most are those vulnerable communities, the disabled, the elderly, the indigent, the people who cannot afford to lose this lifeline just because the rich want to make a profit off of our earned benefits and the taxes that we've paid our entire working careers. And thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, John. Yeah, that's really powerful. And yeah, seeing some folks in the chat talking about Social Security there. But yeah, really appreciate your insights. So we're going to go on to the next question. And again, a lot of these things have kind of already been covered, but how have trade policies contributed to job losses, wage stagnation, or worsening working conditions in your community? So kind of kind of getting at the root of these trade policies. Just gonna give a few, there's some more questions, so I'll open it up if anyone has any additional things to chat about here. I think we've covered a lot of ground, so if anyone else has anything else to say specifically about trade policy. Yeah, Jesse, go for it.
Hello, my name is Jesse Lenny. I'm currently with the New York Trade Justice Coalition here I'm in upstate New York. But in the past, I've worked in manufacturing. I worked for Xerox Corporation as an engineer, and I went to work for their union, and I sort of got to watch over a long period of time, both as an employee of that company and then as an employee of the workers of that company, what sort of the effects of trade over. And I went to work for them in the late 90s, just after NAFTA, and sort of left work employment with the, I ended my job as a union organizer around 2012. So it's sort of in the direct impact. And Xerox sort of had a less, their policy towards the industrial staff, which were unionized, was sort of the let nature take its course. And I was told as a 20-something engineer that they weren't going to fight the union, but they were going to let the union age out. So they predicted that there about 100 people would retire every year, and that was going to be enough. And it was uncanny. In the time that I worked for them, I kept track of the number of folks who were employed directly building the machines we were building. And then once I went to work for their union, I kept tabs on it, and it was uncanny that the union the employment went from about 1,200, which meant there was probably another 1,000 workers here in Rochester on top of the 1,200 that were in the union that supported those workers, and that those numbers were reduced, to dozens of workers 15 years later. And then working for the union, it's a nuanced thing that you notice during negotiations, and also in interviewing and working, helping workers to advocate for themselves on the shop floor. Sort of the pressures of the international pressures affected how much workers were willing to demand during negotiations, their willingness to strike, and all the tactics that were possible up until and before. Going on strike is a last resort, and no worker wants to go on strike. But sort of it became that much harder to sort of take those risks, to advocate for better conditions, wages, up until including, both as a non-union worker myself, and then working with a union and with union staff. There is a stark difference between what you can do, in terms of advocating for safe working conditions. And as important as OSHA is, I sort of learned firsthand the difference between engaging with OSHA as a non-union worker and engaging with OSHA as a union worker, because union workers don't have to fear speaking out if there's something wrong with on the floor that is dangerous. They're obligated and unafraid. But even with, as globalization and trade developed, it was sort of obvious to see the difference in willingness to step forward to deal with even the smallest safety issues. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jesse. We'll go to Clara, and then maybe move on to the next question. And again, if anyone's having trouble with raising your hand, you can also just put it in the chat. But Clara, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. So I think I was just wanted to raise more of a particular example in relation to some of the points that were raised earlier by a couple of people in relation to governments and trade policies. prioritizing profit over people in general. And I think this is kind of like understanding like how these policies and the impacts of those trickle down to different groups and industries on the ground. So maybe it's not an industry directly affected, but it does experience the impacts. So particularly in Washington State, the state employees have really experienced a lot of the impacts of that prioritization of profit over people. Specifically, in my workplace at the University of Washington Medical Center, there's primarily in the food service department, as well as the custodians or the environmental services department. We're the lowest paid workers at the hospital, but we're also the most like necessary to keeping the hospital running. And recently, we've just really been feeling the effects of the state really deprioritizing our basic needs, especially in the last contract bargaining cycle. And then the university just also exploiting that, and not knowing that the university also has funds that it can offer to supplement whatever the state would offer. They are just not willing to do that for us as workers. And so also just thinking about this in relation overall to how this impacts not just my workplace, but other federal and state level institutions that are just being deprioritized. I think it was mentioned in relation to the Social Security offices, as well as the different like IRS offices, things that are helping to ensure that people are getting their basic needs met, like human services, etc. And as well as education overall, and just seeing that all of those things really coming at the cost of the interests of the powerful corporations that can continue to just continue to run, and also just make super profits, just continue to profit off of the on the backs of workers overall. And so, yeah, just to as a little informational plug, there is like an active campaign at my workplace. The campaign is called Food and Nutrition Services Workers United. And it is in an effort to stop the overworking and underpaying of hospital employees, especially given that we are responsible for also supporting the livelihood of the patients that we are serving, in addition to the healthcare workers that are also overworked and underpaid, and whose departments are severely understaffed as well. And yeah, just noting that like we're not the only hospital that's also experiencing this. So thinking about how like all of these things can impact each other and have kind of a cascading effect in relation to the health and livelihood of our communities.
Appreciate that. Thanks so much. I'm going to go to Phyla here in just a second. I do want to open up this next question for folks to get started thinking about. As we enter a second Trump administration, what policy concerns does your community have? Have you ever already been experiencing negative impacts? Obviously, we've been hearing folks talking about that, but just want to open up that question. Clayton, I also saw your hand go up and then go down. So if you want to speak, go ahead and raise that hand back up or put it in the chat. But Phyla, I'll send it over to you.
Okay, very quickly. I'm contrasting, the golden age of manufacturing. These were full-time family-sustaining jobs, and now the usual gig in Reading is low-wage service jobs, retail or healthcare, that are also part-time. So people frequently work 2 or 3 jobs. Just wanted to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that insight. So yeah, the next question about, we're entering a second Trump administration. What type of economic, trade, or broader policy concerns does your community have? Have you already been seeing some of the impacts of this? I know we've kind of already touched on this, but if anyone wants to expand on what they said or bring anything else up, opening that up. Nick, go for it. Oh, let me ask to unmute you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so directly in my community, I am also, other than a longshoreman and my own maritime career, I'm a port commissioner in my town of the Port of Chinook. There is no longer Dungeness crab being exported to China. So if we had not somewhat diversified the buyers in our market, fishermen would be completely capped at their ability to earn income based on the amount of product that individual canneries could take. So as of right now in our harbor, they have completely sold out the capacity of a company called South Bend Products. That will all be domestic. And so they've begun selling to Treyfin Seafoods. And eventually that market will be tapped. And so the American workers' ability to earn with this, whoa, geez, Gus, with this tariff climate is very apparent. Only make as much money as product can be moved and sold. So we could see, if these things continue, we could see the destruction of the full-time fishermen. That could go away, because once the markets are tapped, the job's done. And if you can't keep on selling fish, you can't keep on selling crab, well, you don't have a job. So I just wanted to make that mention.
Appreciate that. Thanks. Jessica, go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, we've already been talking a lot about Trump and how we've already felt impacts. Yeah, and kind of like what I'm hearing too is just the precarity of the trade agreements and relations with other nations to not only impacting our local communities, but also the communities of the home countries of our migrant communities as well. And in some places, like the Philippines, for example, we're seeing like the almost like the leverage that these tariffs are being wielded as by the U.S. in the Philippines, which has like a pretty relatively low tariff rate, 17%. But when you couple that with just the ongoing economic, political relations of the U.S. and the Philippines, which is heavily in favor of the U.S. and of multinational corporations, we're seeing these tariffs and these trade agreements being used as like bargaining chips, basically, for more control and more influence in other home countries of migrants, like the Philippines. And it's really like those pieces too, what Clara was saying earlier around like how economic and social context in home countries of migrants then leading to migration of peoples from those contexts, because there's really no other way to make livelihood or to survive in those particular situations. In the Philippines, I think the numbers maybe like 8,000 Filipinos leave the Philippines every day to find work abroad because there are not enough jobs that pay enough to make ends meet back home. And a lot of what is produced on the ground in the Philippines is not actually for the benefit of the Filipino people. It actually goes to the multinational corporations. And it's actually, and that's because like a lot of that reasoning feeds into the migration of people, migration of women from the Philippines to like places like the US. And so that drawing that connection to the migration aspects as well, we're seeing just a lot of fear and uncertainty among migrant communities here locally. As trade agreements and economic agreements worsen in home countries, we'll see like even greater migration abroad to see better livelihood, but also increasing scrutiny too on migration in general, especially with the anti-migrant policies that we're seeing here locally with the Trump administration. And so, yeah, just to uplift too, like in locally here in Washington, we already know of at least 2 or 3 cases of legal status holders from the Philippines who are detained or who have been detained for up to several years because of the intensifying anti-migrant policies here. And these are women who migrated from the Philippines to try to make ends meet and try to find better livelihood for their children, for their parents back home, and now are trapped, essentially. Some of them have really hard health conditions. One has diabetes and a benign brain tumor, and she's detained at the Northwest Detention Center currently. And she's been begging every day to get medical attention, only to be turned away with ibuprofen and a comeback later. And so I think she's one of many examples, not just from the Filipino community, but even from other migrant communities of how just like the interrelations of how trade and economic policies really impact lives deeply around the world, and make really like deep ripples from here in the US. So yeah.
I appreciate that so much. Yes, it's really difficult to hear those types of stories, but those are the exact types of stories that we can't look away from. Yeah, again, this connection of like, the connection of the root causes of migration, right? So important if we really feel there is, a migration crisis, and there definitely is a crisis of folks not having, opportunities in their home country because of what multinational corporations have done and economically exploited their countries. That these are the types of connections that we need to be making. Obviously, dehumanizing people is not going to do anything. It's just going to harm those communities and the greater community. So we'll go to Jesse next, and definitely if you haven't had a chance to speak yet, I also want to prioritize you. So raise your hand or let me know in the chat if you'd like to speak, but we'll go with Jesse and then Nick.
Yes, I wish I knew more about the port of New York City, because I think I'd be able to echo some of what Nick's been talking about, because in terms of trade, New York City, it's a big deal. And also, I was doing some research recently about the amount of exports that come out of New York State in the form of services, which was new to me. But more locally in upstate New York, you would think that tariffs would support. We still have a significant amount of manufacturing happening in upstate. Obviously, a lot less. This is part of the Rust Belt in the Midwest. But 11% of people of jobs in upstate New York are in manufacturing, but you'd think local manufacturers would be all about tariffs, but so many manufacturers are dependent on imports to make whatever they make. And same with the farming community, which there's significant New York State exports $2 billion worth of agriculture, and many farms depend on imports. So having not just more expensive imports for parts for manufacturing and equipment for farms, but the uncertainty is sort of puts a chill across the entire industry or sector. and then I think also specific to Western New York, where there's about 20 million people in New York State, and I would say there's probably about 3 million people in Western New York. So it's not like New York City. It's more like Ohio, but it's still a significant population. I mean, this economy, this market, we are much more connected with Toronto in terms of the flow of goods, the flow of people, the flow of tourism, and even in workers. A lot of tourism is based on, over the years, I've heard people say, they're excited to go to other countries because things are so cheap. Well, Canadians think that way about us because things we make are cheaper because we work for less. And that sort of source of tourism that, millions of people in New York State depend on is sort of disappearing, at least for the moment, because people in Canada are not that excited about coming to the United States. And the borders, there was a huge impact. COVID had a huge impact because the border was closed, but now Trump's sort of just closing it by poisoning people's attitude towards coming to the United States. I don't know if that's an obvious if people would sort of intuitively come up with that. If you look at how economics departments in universities study metropolitan areas, the borders between states, certainly, and even countries are unless they build a wall at those borders, they're much better for the economy if they're open. And so this is definitely hurting upstate New York directly.
Appreciate that. We're going to go to Clayton, who hasn't spoken yet. And then Nick, if you still want to speak, we can go to you after that. But Clayton, go for it.
Hey, y'all. So Clayton Tucker, I am the secretary of the Texas Farmers Union. And I kind of want to go off a little bit of what Jesse was saying about agriculture, but expand it a little bit more. That really trade deals, these so-called corporate free trade, has been a major component in destroying the American family farmer. And not just the American family farmer, it's also the Mexican family farmers. I'm certain the Canadian family farmers have taken a hit too, because all these trade deals are designed for export corn, export soy, and they're made and written by the likes of JBL, by Tyson, by these other monopolies, so they can drive family farmers out of business, and so they can keep making greater profits for themselves while charging everyone else higher cost for food, as well as providing less quality food. So from the perspective of a rancher, where we raise goats and cattle, these trade deals have been great for big ag. I mean, if you're big ag, if you're Tyson, our trade deals have been fantastic. If you haven't been Tyson, they have been detrimental, and they probably have helped drive you out of business. And once farmers go, rural communities go, and then it just kind of has a domino effect. So that's my 2 cents.
Appreciate that. Thanks. Nick, did you want to give testimony at this point? Yes. Or
I swear I will learn this. I just really wanted to pinpoint on the conversation of people from the Philippines working in the United States or for United States agencies. So United States merchant marine and naval agreements. If there starts to be discrepancies in people's ability to serve in our merchant fleet from the Philippines, or there starts to be issues with people who are serving in our Navy from the Philippines under those agreements, I just want to say in front of everybody, that is something I really want to know. Just because the speaker before last really rung that with, oh my gosh, well, I sailed with a lot of immigrant workers in the merchant marine under those Filipino agreements. And I think we just really need to keep an eye on that, because that agreement between the Philippines and the United States, those sailor agreements, are almost holy. And the erosion of those are, to be frank, of national security concern, because they do have a significant manning inside of our fleet. So I just wanted to point that out. And if anybody has any alarm about that, I would like to know.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. Connections being made. That's awesome. Appreciate that. We're gonna go with Carl, since Carl hasn't spoken yet, and then we'll go to you, Maya. So Carl, go for it.
Hi, yeah, Carl Kramer. I'm with the San Francisco Living Wage Coalition, and we have a dual strategy in our work. One is raising the floors, raising minimum wages. The other is mitigating the factors that are depressing wages for everyone. And we found that free trade policies is a major factor. In our investigation of the way the economy is functioning, the neoliberal design of the economy, particularly the focus on free trade, is that wages are very fungible, that our wages are connected, even if it's not directly into in an industry that is the same. So it may not be that the jobs that are lost from manufacturing, but that what we see is investment capital flows to those sectors of the economy that have the highest rate of return, that have the highest profits, and that's based on the wages being driven down to the lowest possible. And so as across different industries, we see that wages are connected, and that what we tell people is that in San Francisco, where the high cost of living, a living wage for someone with one or two children is at least $40 per hour. That we're not going to be able to achieve a living wage for everybody as long as corporations can move across this line in the sand and pay. Currently the minimum wage is $18 per day in Mexico. In 2008, we had a delegation go to Ciudad Juarez to meet with people in Anapra, the most marginalized community in Ciudad Juarez, and at that time, that was 18 years after the passage of NAFTA, where in 1994, the minimum wage in Mexico was about the equivalent of $5 per day. By that time, it was equivalent of $4 per day. It had already lost 25% of its value. And since that time, we had exchanges of people coming from Juarez and our members going back to Juarez, and building also campaigns of material support for organizations in Juarez, and doing trainings on organizing, particularly organizing in the maquiladoras. In 2015, there were massive strikes in Juarez at about 5 or 6 of the maquiladoras that were between 3,000 and 6,000 workers each were going out on strike. And as the companies were firing massive numbers of workers, those workers would then have plantons in front of the factory gates, and they had submitted their petitions for independent unions to the local labor boards and the state labor board. In each of the cases, except one, the labor boards just denied their petitions. And one plant, it was multiple times based on that there were typos in the petition they submitted. Only in one case did the labor board grant them union recognition, and that was because they went and occupied the offices of the labor board until they finally were granted that. But then most of their members had been fired, so they were trying to organize a union from the outside. We sent a delegation down to Juarez and did a report on what was what had happened during the strike, what the outcome was, and then submitted that report to at the time it was the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi's office, and then brought workers from Juarez to also meet with the staff there and to give the what had happened, and as far as the government not recognizing workers' rights to organize a union, and then working with many of you all in this meeting on a national campaign during the renegotiation of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement to get those provisions in that agreement that to have a certain kind of level of worker protections. That along with the labor reform under President Andrés Manuel López Obrador and also his efforts to raise the minimum wage. We've seen it, almost immediately doubled along the border area. In Matamoros, Tamaulipas, about 35,000 to 40,000 workers went on strike there to force the factory owners to abide by the new minimum wage. And across Mexico, because of the labor law reform, but also using those provisions in the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, particularly the rapid response mechanism, that workers were able to vote out the protection contracts in their factories and bring in independent unions of their own choosing. We saw that in Silao, Guanajuato at the General Motors plant, where workers organized their independent union, Cynthia, and won a union contract against General Motors, having to more than twice use the rapid response mechanism and the threat of sanctions against General Motors being able to export its light trucks to the United States, most profitable department of General Motors. We also in Piedra Negra's Coahuila, workers there who had formed the independent union La Liga at a third-tier auto parts manufacturing factory, VU Manufacturing. The workers there had organized the independent union, used the rapid response mechanism, and then I had to use it again to bring the company to the bargaining table, and had to use it again because of their unfair, that their refusal to bargain in good faith. The Mexican government had a remediation plan the company was supposed to follow. The company shut down the factory rather than negotiate with workers, and laid off workers, illegally withholding their severance pay. That company is based in Wayne, Michigan. We took part in national meetings with the national Zoom meeting with the U.S. Department of Labor and U.S. Trade Representative, Office of the General Counsel. The response was that there was nothing that could be done because the provisions of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement are site-specific. that it's is only the actions that can be taken against that factory. Once it's closed, there's nothing that can be done. That it doesn't follow the supply chain. It doesn't go, it doesn't follow the corporation that has its production there at that plant. These are the type of things that need to be that we need to build up a movement around now the review of the US-Mexico-Canada agreement and demands to have these worker protections and protections for the environment strengthened within the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. Last point I want to make is that tariffs are not the answer. They're not putting money in the pockets of workers. As we all know, that it's really a form of regressive tax, but we're not going to see all of the manufacturing returning from Mexico back to the US, no matter what the level of tariffs are. John Deere Tractors is closing a plant in the US, and they're spending millions to have a new plant built in Mexico. And they were asked, well, with the tariff, is that going to change your plans to spend millions to build this new factory? And I said, no, it doesn't really make that much difference, because there's so much tremendous profits with the level of wages they're paying. So the answer is doing what we can to protect workers' rights to organize so they can raise their own wages. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carl. Maya, we're going to go to you. I do want to time check a little bit. The last question is Carl, you kind of started this off, but what actions are needed from policymakers to ensure that we're remedying some of these issues? I understand if people need to hop off at 7, I'll stay on in case people still want to talk and things like that, but I'll pass it off to Maya, and then if anyone wants to talk about what we need from policymakers, just raise your hand. Thanks. Go for it, Maya.
Well, I just wanted to speak to, I think, first of all, I'm appreciating that there's a lot of oral history on this call, which is really nice, because it's really been interesting to learn about ports and issues all over the place. We also are a border community where I live, and I am also a local lawmaker. And one of the things that's happening is that there's now suddenly social impact of these tariffs on literal families, and on communities that we have tons of small micro communities on in our area and in this county, and some of them are port based, and some of them are, we have literally a part of our county that you actually have to go through Canada to access. So this has just been wreaking havoc on a lot of people's lives for no great reason. And it's also created a lot of hardship for businesses that do rely on people crossing the border, because for whatever reason, a lot of people cross the border and come to our county and spend money, whether it's on gas or food or groceries or going out to coffee, whatever it is. We just have always had a lot of traffic across the border coming to hang out. And or just in transit, down the coast. But ultimately that has really stopped. And we've had, we've seen communities sort of starting to organize around the social aspect of this. Let's have a get together at the border and shake hands across the border and try to promote goodwill, because there's just been so much anger. And so that's one thing, that's one impact that these trade policies have had that's very human, that, it has the potential, these kinds of, tariffs and flipping of trade policies in ways that are a little bit reckless and don't really know, in a nuanced way how those are going to actually impact people and communities. It actually can have the weirdest effects, right? It can mess up families and friendships and lives. And the other thing that has happened directly is that there seems to now be, because of the immigration policies, which are obviously trade related, but also rights related, now it's also impacting our university here. And, they're cutting English language teaching department positions, and that's going to impact students. And, there's all these ripple effects. So I think I'm going to just sort of pivot from there to what I think I would love to see these actions taken to protect workers and everyone. I would really like to see an awareness that these trade agreements and trade policies have a huge impact on everyday people in like so many ways. And it's like a web, if you like touch one part of it, everything else feels it. It's not something that you should be reckless about. And I think everyone on this call has provided so many great examples of that. And there are, literally infinite examples of that because it's just an infinite topic. And I would say one of the most important things from my perspective as an organizer around privacy and tech justice is that, apply that also to the way in which trade is being conceptualized as of digital trade. And understanding that when you put all of the power in corporations to decide how people's digital lives should be conducted, it then affects every aspect of our lives as well, right? From housing to the price of goods, to the way that trade happens, to our ports, to our immigration dynamics, everything. And so, and even education, right? There's a lot of issues happening with education right now and technology, and a lot of parents upset, a lot of teachers upset. There's just so much going on in this space. And so I think that is one of my demands, is that greater care be taken, and that these kinds of tribunals or assemblies or meetings are held, and those dates are kept, and that is taken seriously, because ultimately it's the people that make a nation, not a few billionaire companies, right? It's people that make a nation, and I think we all deserve to have our voices in the places where these decisions are made. And so that would be my call to action.
I appreciate that so much, Maya. Betsy, we'll go to you. Another thing that I just want to open up the floor real quick, because we're kind of hitting 7, is if you or your organization has anything they want to plug in this space. We've had some folks talk about different campaigns. Please as well do that. You can do that in the chat, or you can plug it here. I'll put some links in the chat for us, but I don't want to take up these last 5 minutes. So keeping the floor open. Betsy, go for it.
So just really briefly, I want to raise up the issue of how much our trade agreements impact the price of medications in the US in really crazy ways. I mean, there's medications you can buy in Europe for 1/10 the cost of here, and trade agreements that affect patents. It's wonky stuff, but it's one of those ways in which trade prioritizes the profits of the corporations over the needs of the people. And I would want to bring that forward. The other thing is that with Trump, things have been so crazy and erratic that there's ways in which, even given a priority of profits and corporate profits over people's needs, the erratic way that some of these tariffs have been applied may really interrupt some of the supply chain. Remember that word from early COVID days, of things like the raw ingredients that come to make generic medicines, etc. So just, it's not something we think about in our daily lives, but absolutely these federal policies are impacting every one of us. Check. Thanks.
Thanks, Betsy. Donna, go for it.
Yeah, just a quick plug for an upcoming event that EWA will be putting on. If folks are interested in learning more about, from an international perspective, how trade has this sort of trickle-down effect to communities in rural areas in the Global South in particular, we will be having an online educational forum that will feature speakers from Latin America, Africa, and the Asia Pacific region, mainly women coming from peasant communities, indigenous communities, and the struggles they face, everyday lives, from food sovereignty to fighting back against mining operations, and other things that are drastically impacted because of these trade policies that have, unequal and very severe impacts to communities in the global south. So that will be on April 26th. We're still determining which time zone to prioritize, but if you want to hold the date and visit our website, internationalwomen'salliance.org, you can find out more information, and I'll go ahead and put that in the chat as well.
I appreciate that, Donna. Thanks so much. And yeah, feel free to put stuff in the chat. I'm saving it, but also feel free to email me if there's anything that you would like me to plug. I'll be sending an email out to everyone tomorrow, and it'll have this information. So if you can't pull it up right now, you'll have a chance to do that. I do want to plug thank you, Mara, for putting in the ongoing USMCA negotiation. That's exactly what I was going to plug. Carl mentioned this as well. One of these trade agreements that's had a devastating impact. A lot of people have talked about NAFTA on this call. The USMCA is just Trump's rebranding of that those negotiations are going to start happening here soon. One of the links I put, and then I'll send out again, is an organizational sign-on letter for folks to get on to demand some of these labor rights, environmental regulations, and other human rights enforcements. But there's a lot of work that's going to be done there. So definitely recommend plugging in through our website, donating if you have any resources to do so, sharing petitions. There's a lot of powerful ways for folks to get involved in trade justice. I do want to thank everyone so much for taking the time to share your stories and experiences tonight. I think this has been the exact type of conversation that we need to have and that elected officials don't want to hear. And so again, thank you all so much for contributing. I think we've made it very clear that trade is not a siloed issue. All of these things are interconnected, and therefore it's so important to have conversations like these where we're bringing in all of these different intersectional views and hearing from folks. So again, plug into the USMCA campaign if you're interested. Donate if you can. Take a look at all the other things folks are putting in the chat. Again, I will be sending these out, but also if I send out the email and I miss something, feel free to reply to all. And then again, thank you all so much for being here again. I think we'll have many other opportunities to share stories like this, but I really appreciate it. And again, if you will be kind of compiling some of this testimony, putting it into a report, a people's report, and publicizing it, sending it to the administration. And if that's something that you want me to kind of amend or change some of your testimony so that, certain names are concealed or whatever, please let me know. I'll share that with everyone before it goes out too, so that we're making sure everyone's safe. But yeah, thank you all so much. And I don't know if anyone has any last minute things they want to plug. I know we kind of rushed the end of this, but again, thank you all so much. And we'll have many more opportunities for these important conversations, but I appreciate it and have a wonderful evening. Bye, everyone.